I know when I first started off engineering, I wish that I'd had somebody that gave me, or somebodies, multiple people, that would have given me a little more advice about the business in general. And today, I'm hoping to maybe impart some of the wisdom that I've learned over the past 25 years to you. So stick around. Hello, Internet. Chris Cline here with Alma Music Center in San Antonio, Texas. And today we're going to talk a little more about the recording business from the viewpoint or the lens of a beginning engineer. And I'm going to give a few tips and pointers, do's and don'ts of things that you might want to pay attention to. Before we do move forward with this content, I'd like to remind you to please subscribe. We're going to be bringing you more content like this, and also take a look at some of our other channels as well: guitar, accordion, bass, piano. I'm sure there's going to be more, coming down the pipeline at some point. But let's go ahead and move on with, some of these pointers that I have for you today, and hopefully some of these things can help you out in your journey as a new engineer, or even if you are a seasoned engineer. So let's go ahead and get started with number one. So this is number one. These are really in no particular order, and the reason I have made this one number one is because this is one of the first big mistakes that I made, and this was going all the way back to the summer of '97, and I was working with this band, and we decided that we were going to record all the vocals in the bathroom, which was a gigantic mistake. And eventually, some of these songs, actually the whole record was remixed, I don't know, maybe 5-10 years ago. And there was a single from this band. I'm not going to mention the band's name because I don't want to put them in any kind of weird position. But there was a single from this record that was actually re-released by a label in the UK called Domino. And when they did this back in 2001, 2002, they recut the vocal so they could replace what we did in the bathroom. At the time we were all of us were pretty green, and we thought it would, give the album a different feel, different tone, the vocals a different feel, different tone. But once you have that bathroom time, those weird echoes, the weird reverb in the vocal track, there's nothing you can do about it. And there are plugins that will try to deverb and things like that, but I have found that most of those don't really work that well. And when we were making this record, we were actually making the record on 2-inch tape. It was a Studer 800 Mark III. We only had 23 tracks of tape because track 24 is usually used for time code. But anyhow, the point of this is don't record your vocals in the bathroom unless you are absolutely positively sure this is the sound that you want. My suggestion is go ahead and record the vocals in a dry or a controlled environment. And then if you want to have that bathroom tone later, go ahead and create an effects loop. Put a speaker in the bathroom, have an aux send feeding that speaker, have a microphone in there, capture the sound of the bathroom as you feed stuff through your aux send, and then re-record that back into your session or back to tape or whatever medium you're using. But if you commit a bathroom vocal, there's a good chance that you're probably going to want to undo that. We certainly did, and the original issue of this album has bathroom vocals all over it. And actually at one point when we were cutting the vocals, I think that there was beer involved at the time, and the vocalist actually threw up, which is probably on tape at some point. He got so into the performance that he threw up, and that might have been one benefit. He was able to hit the toilet really, really quickly. So don't record your vocals in the bathroom. So next on my list is don't overextend yourself. And by overextending yourself, this is in regards to how much time you're spending in the studio, and what you can or cannot do. Don't ever say you can do something that you can't do, because it's bound to backfire on you once you get into the studio. And as far as time, if you're a young engineer and you're, in your early to mid 20s, and that's where I was when I started, maybe you can do 70 hours a week. But my suggestion is try not to do that, because you're going to burn out and get really, really tired. And if you're spending that much time in the studio, everything is going to fatigue your ears, your brain, and you're going to end up with diminishing returns on what you're tracking and or what you're mixing. I know for me, when I'm mixing at 8 hours, I'm done, I'm shot. Tracking, I can spend more time. But really try to take care of yourself. And going back to the other, don't say you can do things that you can't do. Don't, throw yourself into the arena to, produce or engineer a hip hop album when you have no idea what those techniques are, because again, it's bound to backfire on you, and it's gonna get you a lot of bad press or bad word of mouth, which you don't want. I certainly have suffered from some of this because, when I was 24 and I started doing this, I fell into that trap of, I wanted to take every job that I could get because I was afraid that I would lose a job or lose the next job. And it backfired on me more than once. And I learned after a couple of years, like if somebody wants to come and do a whatever type of record that's not my wheelhouse, I'm just going to say no. I'm not going to do it. So don't do things you're not geared to do, and don't try to kill yourself with too much time in the studio unless you know you can absolutely positively handle it. Another thing that you should really be aware of is committing to any kind of processing on tape or in the box. I'm going to say tape a lot because I started off on 2-inch tape machines and D88s and ADATs and things of that nature. And what I mean to commit to processing is, there are certain things that just can't be undone or that won't fit within the context of a mix or a song once you get to the mixing stage. For instance, if you have, super heavy compression on a vocal that should be a little more gentle, well, guess what? You probably need to go back in and recut that vocal, and it might take time to do that. And it's also going to take more money. Gating the tape. I would see people try to gate the tape, and I'm like, oh, that's just a recipe for disaster. Because if the drummer or guitarist or whatever, if they're not being, if their dynamics are not super tight, then you might find that your gate's not going to open up. And if you're tracking, you might not catch that. So you might not, catch the attack of a guitar, or a tom-tom might not actually open up because it wasn't hit hard enough. So now you have this tom hit that's not happening. And when you're in the analog or a linear domain, like tape or D88s, well, guess what? It's going to be really, really hard to correct that. You might have a sampler or something that you can use and you can punch it in or whatever. But that's not necessarily honest. And even if you're in Pro Tools or DAW and you commit an effect to tape or some sort of dynamics processing, you still could suffer the same issues. Maybe in Pro Tools you might find another hit or another take somewhere where you can actually copy and paste because processor X, Y, and Z reacted the way it was supposed to, and then you can fix it. But in other domains you can't. I remember this one session in particular. It had to have been about 98, and I was assisting. And when you're an assistant engineer, in most instances, it's your job to help, run cable, do line checks, maybe, spot some mics and things of that nature. And then after that, you're just going to kind of sit back, and if the engineer that you're working with is really, really good, hopefully you're going to be a sponge and learn a lot. Well, on this one particular occasion, I had this engineer come in, and he was really kind of full of himself, and he had all these grand ideas, and I'm okay, whatever, I'm here to help out. You tell me what you want me to do, and I'll go. And so he wanted to do this thing with the drum set where he put drum triggers on acoustic drums, and then those triggers were feeding a gate. And then the output of the microphones of the drums, the acoustic drums, were actually going into the gate. And so what was going to happen was whenever the drum was hit, instead of the microphone or the actual signal or tone of the drum opening the gate, the trigger was going to open the gate. Well, after about, drums take a while to set up. And if you're doing a big record, you might spend a whole day, 2 days on drums. But after about 3 or 4 hours of setting up these drums and doing all these things with the triggers feeding the gates, we start tracking, and guess what? The triggers aren't firing the gate, and therefore the toms and other drums are not actually being printed to tape. And I distinctly, specifically remember thinking when we were doing this, oh, this is not going to go well. And it didn't. And I kept my mouth shut. But then we had to undo all this work because it wasn't going to work. And fortunately it was caught before it happened because we weren't hearing the results, or he wasn't hearing the results he wanted, which was drum pickup, opening the gate or firing the key input, and then the microphone signal going through. It was just a gigantic waste of time, and I knew it was going to be, but I kept my mouth shut because I was an assistant engineer. So this goes back to printing effects to tape. Be really, really leery of that. And when it comes to guitars and synths and keyboards and things like that, you probably have a really good idea of what's going to happen with those tones and those effects, or whatever you have in your pedal board and things like that. But I'm talking more specifically about dynamics effect processing, or dynamic processing in general, compression, limiting, gates. Once it's there, you can't undo it. And if the results aren't what you want within the context of the mix, once again, you're going to be going back and starting over and recutting vocals or whatever it is that didn't work out. So really be careful with that. So this one's really, really important. And this has to do with the psychology of being in the studio. And it takes a little bit of time to understand all these dynamics. And of course, every band is radically different, or every artist is radically different. Their needs, what it's going to take to get out a good performance. There's just a lot that goes into it, especially when you do have, 4, 5, 6 people in a room. Everybody has some kind of ego. And when things start going south, the session can be thrown off track, can go sideways really, really quick. So you as a new engineer, you need to figure out how to establish boundaries with the artists and musicians you're working with so you can communicate them with better efficacy. And some of these boundaries are, if I hear somebody being pitchy or if somebody is, rhythmically off, the tempo's not working for them or whatever it may be, at what point can you as an engineer, you're not the producer, you're an engineer, can you step in and give pointers? And you might want to establish that, you do want to establish that with the band. After you've been doing this for a few years, you're going to be able to feel it out and you're going to kind of know what you can do most of the time. And if you don't know, you're going to figure it out really, really quickly because the musicians will let you know really fast if they're not happy with what's happening in the cutting room or in the mix. So really, really try to establish these boundaries and guidelines for how you're going to communicate in the studio. Be really, really open with the artists. Let them know that you're there for them, for anything that they need. This is a service industry. I don't want to say it's like you're a waiter, but in a sense you are. You're catering. You're waiting on this band because you're trying to help them achieve whatever it is that they're hearing in their practice space or in their rehearsal studio, in their head. You're trying to help them achieve that and get that down to tape, Pro Tools, whatever your medium is. So establish those boundaries really, really quickly and try to figure out how you can communicate with the band so you can get the best performances. So if you're a freelance engineer, that means that you're probably working at multiple studios within your market, or maybe as you progress, you start working at studios around the country or around the world. One of the things you should do is you should get to understand the policies and the protocols of that studio. Is food allowed in the control room? Is it allowed in the cutting room? Is it okay to drink? Can the musicians smoke pot? All these things have to do with the studio procedures and protocols, and you need to understand those procedures before you go and do a studio. You need to understand what their shutdown or normalizing procedures are. If they have interns working the studio, there's a good chance that the interns might come in and clean everything up and normalize the desk. But you should understand all this stuff as a freelance engineer before you walk through a studio's doors. Because I can guarantee you that the studio manager or the owner of the commercial space is going to appreciate it so much. And they will let you know after your session is done, like, thank you so much for wrapping up cables properly, for normalizing the board, for cleaning tape heads, blah, 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 blah. They're going to let you know what they liked about you and your session or what they didn't like. And, I felt this burn, probably 6 or 7 years ago. I had been working at a studio in the Bay Area, basically on the border of Berkeley and Oakland, and the studio gained a couple of new studio owners, a couple of new partners. And when I had been recording there in the past, at the end of the day, it was kind of like, well, just, clean up and make it look nicer, and, we'll take care of anything that you didn't miss, and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, okay, that's pretty easy. So I'd wrap cables and, normal out the board to the best of my ability. But when the new partners came in, they wanted everything to be absolutely perfect. And this wasn't communicated to me. I was used to getting everything straight, not pristine, where everything was, when I came in. And really, we should all follow that rule. But again, some studios don't. They have their own protocols, and they have people that they're paying to do that. But anyhow, the other two partners were a little miffed when I left because everything wasn't exactly where it had been before. We're talking about, knobs on outboard gear. We're talking about the console not being normaled out absolutely perfectly. And this was because I had gotten comfortable with the old way, but the new way hadn't been communicated with me. So this comes back to you developing and communicating and having some sort of rapport with the studio managers and the owners to make sure that y'all are all on the same page with the policies, because you want to go back to whatever that studio is to do more work. You might find a band that loves that studio, and you want to make sure that you're in their best graces. And I'm still in their good graces. It was just a misunderstanding. But the point I'm trying to get across is just always make the effort to get to know the owners and the managers of the studio and exactly what it is they want you to do or not to do, all throughout your session. And that includes everything, again, drink, food, drugs. It's the music industry. People do drugs. I mean, they do drugs in every industry. But some studios have a policy of, well, you can't smoke pot in the control room, or it's only in the cutting room where you have to go to the back dock or whatever. Just make sure you're on the same page with the people that matter in the studio. Cool? All right. Okay, so this is really important because if you're just starting off, you're trying to make this your career, your livelihood, your income, maybe for the rest of your life. It is gig work, so it could be feast or famine. Always make sure you get paid. I've been burned multiple times. And every time I've been burned, it tends to have been a little bit different in how it's happened. So I have created these different rules and policies for myself to make sure that I don't get stiffed at the end of a session. Now, back in the day, whenever we were done with the session and we were getting final mixes and everything, our mixes were being printed to, more likely than not, digital audio tape, or maybe to a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch Studer or Otari deck. It just depends. But we also always had Tascam, in most cases, Tascam, I can't remember what model number it was, a 102 Mark III or what, I can't remember. These pro cassette decks, and we would buy these cassettes that had anywhere from like 5 to 10 minutes of time on each side. They weren't labeled, that we could give to the artists. Now, here's what could happen back in the old days. You could print everything to a DAT, 1/4 inch, blah, 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 but also to a cassette. Think of the cassette as your reference MP3 that you might send to a client, right? You don't want to use a reference MP3 for your final product. Well, you certainly don't want to use the cassette either. But back in the day, some people would. And what would happen is you would give them the cassette and everything else would stay in the studio. And then they would run off and use that cassette in some way to duplicate or replicate the mix. And then you wouldn't get paid for the final mixes. And you generally didn't have a whole lot of recourse. It was like, okay, well, we did 3-4 days of mixing, which at that time could have been, $600-700 of my time, and I didn't get paid. And that is a bummer. So whenever you're handing something off, a final mix, and this is going to sound devious, but trust me, it's going to work for you. At the end of the mix, maybe cut off the last few seconds. It's just, I made a mistake. If you're giving them a WAV file or something like that. Or give them an MP3 at 128 kbps. Nobody wants to listen to that. And people that don't really care about what they're doing might use that or the other. But somehow, I don't want to say sabotage, but give them a reference mix that is not quite done, or there's something weird about it. It's too low, there's just something that happens within it so that it's not usable, to ensure that you're going to get paid, okay? Another thing that I do, and this is a policy that I've had for a while, and this is something that you might need to, it might take you a couple of years to get to this point, but get a deposit. Get a deposit on any work that you're going to do, and that's going to require some kind of estimate. So let's say, you're going to track a record, a 10-song record, and it's going to take you maybe 2 weeks to track that record, and you're going to spend maybe 10 hours a day in the studio, Monday through Friday, or whatever works for the band, Wednesday through Sunday. Give them an approximate amount of time, what your fee is, and then require 50% deposit. This does a couple of things. It ensures that your time is locked in, right? Because you don't want to book somebody for 2 weeks and the day before they bail and you're like, well, how am I going to fill this 2 weeks of time that I had accounted for, that I had budgeted for right now? So it ensures that your time is going to be used, right? And hopefully that you're going to get paid for the remainder of the time. It also ensures that the band is going to be a little more committed when they come in for the session. They're going to have that psychological narrative in their head saying, well, we've already paid for part of this. So when we go into the studio, we better be prepared. We better be ready to deliver the best performances we possibly can, right? So do you see how that is, giving a little bit of insurance to both of you? It's not just about you. It's also about the band and trying to get them a little more motivated to really come in and do something special, right? But once again, it's going to take a little bit of time to start to feel how much of your time it's going to take to do X, Y, and Z. Also, when you do this, when you start taking deposits and giving estimates on time, you need to let the band know this is an estimate. My time also is hourly. Because if you start giving block rates, or if you start giving flat rates, my friend Brant likes to say, well, people will turn into Brian Wilson really, really fast, meaning that you give them a flat rate, they're going to use up all the time they possibly can with you to try to achieve the best product that they can. And you end up getting paid nothing for a year's worth of work. So always do the hourly thing as well. So hopefully I'm being clear with how all this stuff works too. And this is my final thought today. And I know that I'm leaving some things out, and we can address these things later. But be sure to do your taxes. And I know this sounds insane. We're trying to create meaningful musical performances and whatnot. But Uncle Sam is going to come into play. If you're not doing your taxes, you will get caught with your pants down. It happened to me many years ago. It wasn't that I wasn't doing my taxes necessarily. My issue was that I was not putting away for my taxes. So find a good CPA. And you probably want to put, rule of thumb, you probably want to put back about 25 to 30% of everything that you earn. Now, the CPA is also going to give you some guidance on what you can write off. Now, if you're like me, which I assume you are in many, many ways, in that you are, a creator, engineer, maybe you're a music business person, publisher, whatever, sync agent, your whole life revolves around music. And almost everything you do in the musical domain, you can write off. If you're buying records, that's research. If you have memberships to the Audio Engineering Society or NARAS, the National Academy of Recording Arts and Sciences, or you've got publishing dues to BMI or ASCAP, which you shouldn't have publishing dues. You should only pay one fee for each of those organizations, depending on what you do. But anyhow, anything you do that's music related, subscriptions to Sound on Sound or Mix Magazine or whatever, you can write that stuff off. But you need to make sure that you are being transparent with your receipts and why you are doing these things. When you're in this world, you are going to be eating out a lot as well. Going back to like health and don't overextend yourself, try to eat good food. Don't eat pizza and heavy tacos every day. But the point I'm getting with this is you can also write off what you eat when you're eating. It's a business expense. You're in the studio, you're catering to these bands, you're going out and you're having lunch, dinner, whatever. You might be having 3 meals a day together. And in the process, you're talking about what you're going to be working on. This is a business expense. So find a good CPA, one that understands the machinations of the music industry, and they're going to set you on the right path. There's a good chance that after 2 or 3 years of filing with CPA X, you might not need to use a CPA again. You might be able to figure out what it is that you can and can't do, and you might learn how to file taxes on your own instead of paying $500,000, whatever the CPA is charging. But if you do it a couple of times, you're going to have a really good idea of what you can and can't do, how much money you need to be stashing aside with every gig that you work on, and what your write-offs, what they're going to look like at the end of the year. And these write-offs also include musical equipment, strings, accessories, software, new computers, anything and everything. So find a good CPA. Also, kind of tied into this, the business legal aspect of everything, is you also at some point might want to find a good entertainment attorney. Not only is this going to help you if you get into working with production points and things of that nature, or maybe you as you're engineering or producing a record, you inject something special within the context of a song, which should give you publishing points as well. You need to have a solid entertainment attorney that can provide you with the contracts and the agreements that are going to, once again, benefit both you and the artist. It should never always be about you. You should be the main concern, but a good contract should benefit both of you in some way, even with the compromises. So I hope that you gleaned something from this information that I just gave to you, and this is all based off of my own experiences. You might find different opinions online, which is fine. I mean, we all have our own opinions, right? But these are just lessons that I have learned over the years, and it's all stuff that I still employ today. And I've been doing this for, well, next year will be 26 years for me, and I'm not a super successful engineer. I've always worked in the independent realm, but I do enough to make a living off of it. And, these guidelines have helped me to continue down this path, to keep my toe in the talent pool for independent music. And these guidelines that I just gave to you have helped me out a great deal, have helped artists out a great deal, have helped to inform their paths moving forward too. So let's discuss this more in the comments down below. I'm sure you probably have a load of comments. You probably have some stories of successes or failures that you've had in the industry that are somewhat associated with what we were just discussing. So please, let's talk about that down below, or you can hit me up at my website at civilianaudio.com, and we can continue on the conversation, one-to-one. So with that being said, I want to go ahead and close this out, and I'm going to give you the typical, hey, everybody, be kind to each other. It's not that hard. Let's keep the comments down below constructive and decent. We're trying to nourish our careers as musicians, and it's an uphill battle for a lot of us most of the time. This type of content can really, really help us to progress and do better, more special things while hopefully maintaining a better headspace. So be kind, keep on creating. There's so many tools, so many great tools, more stuff coming out. Let's talk about that as well down below. And as I said before, if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel. We'll be bringing you more content like this. And until next time, I am Chris Cline, and I hope that you continue down your musical journey and that you hit home runs the whole way. Thanks a lot.